Bing bong. I am live with another edition of the State of Bitcoin podcast. But first, before I get into the rip, I want to thank MyNode. MyNode is helping me get podcasting 2.0 set up. So if you have Breeze or one of those podcasting apps and you feel the need to send me sats, you can now do that thanks to the help of MyNode. So check them out at MyNodeBTC and MyNodeBTC.com. I've got a very, very special guest, probably one of the cooler Avies I've ever seen on Twitter and handles, Stakamoto at the Savage Patch Kid. And I'll pull him up. Man, how are you doing today on this?
Hey, man, I'm doing well. I'm doing well, man. Can't complain. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Of course. So right off the bat, I see the Alabama shirt. I got to ask you, man. So are you an Alabama fan? Did you go there, or are you just like one of the many in Alabama that just roots for them because they're good?
No, man. No bandwagoning for me. I went there, graduated from there. I'm originally from Alabama, even though, to be honest, like this is my dirty secret. But I used to be an Auburn fan before I actually went to Alabama. Don't tell anybody. No, but
us now. Nobody else is gonna know.
No, but yeah, no, I definitely went there, and like just got to support the home team. I don't live in Alabama anymore, but I'm always repping. So I got to let people know.
Yeah, I get it. Hey, I went to A&M, so the SEC football, it runs deep. It never leaves you, right? So those games that you were at, I don't know, Bryant Denny, is it the stadium there and all that? So, I mean, you can't forget those times and can't go against the team. But yeah, so let's jump into Bitcoin, right? That's why we're here. So tell us a little bit about how you found Bitcoin and your orange pill story.
Okay, so the way I found it was like I was in China and I had heard about it before and I never really looked into it. And I just had a lot of time on my hands when I was over there, and I would be in my room at times and just had the internet to kind of for entertainment or learning or anything. And I'm not sure what made me look into it, but I just ended up looking into Bitcoin and finding the white paper. And even though I didn't immediately understand why Bitcoin, not quote unquote blockchain or crypto or whatever, it took me a little while to crystallize that understanding. But the white paper generally just captured my imagination, and just from that point on, it's been a journey of learning and getting deeper in in Bitcoin, deeper in economics, macro, just a lot of different topics of I found through the prism of Bitcoin. But when I probably first heard about it, I would probably say it was while I was at Alabama. I just never looked into it, so kind of kick myself for not just looking up the white paper then. But things happen as they're supposed to. So that's kind of my story in brief.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, I mean, that's wild. So you were in China, and that was the first time you heard of it. I think that's the first orange pill story where I've heard it. Somebody is like, I was traveling abroad in another country, and that's where I first heard of it. Usually, it's like a family member or a crazy cousin or something along those lines. So, did you have like a background in tech? You don't have to, get into your full background or anything like that, but what kind of I guess stuck out about Bitcoin for you? Was it like the tech, the sound money? Like what kind of made that initial click?
Yeah, so like I said, I first heard about it in college, but I didn't actually look into it until I was in China. But whenever, like, what really probably stuck out, I can't really pinpoint when this happened, but I was kind of already government skeptical by the time I saw the white paper, and it's just like the idea of money outside of the control of any one entity, including governments, was attractive, and I didn't really understand at the time technically how that was enabled. But I would say that was kind of the main draw. Is just like the idea just seemed too good to be true at the time, but in a good way, like in like a way you want to learn more about, and it just that concept of uncorruptible money, it was just like was curious to me, and it's kind of funny, like a lot of people kind of find Bitcoin through maybe Austrian economics or their love of macro or whatever, whereas like I found Austrian economics and macro by way of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin kind of was my I guess baptizer into the world of trying to understand craziness of our current monetary regime, as you could call it.
Yeah, exactly. So, so you found Bitcoin, right? And then now you're down the rabbit hole. You probably purchased some of your first, and you're holding on to it. And now it brings you to creating Base 58. To my understanding, Base 58 is more of like a Bitcoin educational program. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So we we call ourselves the world's best Bitcoin education company, right? So we our flagship offering is a 6-week transaction protocol course. So my co-founder, Nifty Nay, on Twitter, she works at Blockstream on Core Lightning. So she's been a developer for about 10 years and has been working on Bitcoin for about 4. And I met her now like almost a year ago to the date, um, and at the end of last year, she kind of came to me with the idea she wants to start teaching these courses, and asked if I would kind of be on the business side of the house. And we kind of got the paperwork written up, and then we launched our first course at the end of January, and it's just been off to the races ever since. So we do more than just the transaction protocol course. We also have what we call the Bitcoin Node LARP, or live action role play, but that's kind of more of a family friendly or noob friendly way of kind of visualizing and making the something visceral, and innately digital in Bitcoin, like the P2P network of Bitcoin, the peer-to-peer network of how Bitcoin nodes connect and how transactions are mined and sent. We kind of take these real world concepts that you can't really touch, and kind of make it kind of replicate it in a physical way that's kind of gamified and fun for people to learn. And then we just recently had a conference, and combo conference and hackathon that we planned and co-promoted and planned with Pleb Lab out of Austin. So we handled like the conference side of things. They handled the hackathon, and we kind of came together as 2 teams, and just we're banging it out and figuring out things behind the scenes, and we just had a great event. So we're gonna keep on iterating on our products we have. We want to add new products, and we're going to keep on getting better. But thus far, this first 6 months of operation have been really, really great.
Wow. So 6 months only, and you're already, getting Base 58 up to run, and then you get Bitcoin plus plus. You didn't throw in the name there, but I'll throw it in there for
Thank you.
listening. Because I mean, if you're, in the Bitcoin space, and even if you're not a developer or into that sort of realm, I think, by now you hear it on Marty Bent's podcast and some of these other places. Like, you hear it all the time coming out of Austin, and that's a huge deal. And so good on you. I think, like, one of the great things that I love about Bitcoin and Bitcoin network, just not like the actual network, but the people in it, is that they really embody the whole proof of work concept. So like you said, you've gotten in there 6 months, already trying to help educate, and now putting together a conference. So I got to ask you, like, what was the motivation behind doing all this? Was it like, okay, like, I learned all this stuff and I need to spray it to the world? Or was it more like, hey, somebody asked me to help and I was like, why not? What was, did you always kind of plan on doing something like this? What was kind of, I guess, the reasoning behind starting all this?
Yeah. So I would kind of say, like, it's, things tend to work out whenever you put in the dedication, over a certain point in time, I would say. So, I've been in Bitcoin for a little while, and then last year in Bitcoin Miami, 2021, excuse me, I decided to get more involved, and like I didn't really know what that meant at that point in time, but initially I'm just going to start going to meetups. So after 2021 in Miami, I went to BitDevs in Austin the week after, and I introduced myself to Parker Lewis, the head of BD at Unchained Capital, and I had found him through his essay series, Gradually Then Suddenly, and that kind of really helped me understand, like, bridge the gap between quote unquote blockchain, Bitcoin, not blockchain, right? And So I just introduced myself and just told him, thank you for his work. And he ended up telling me about the Houston meetup that goes on monthly. And like this was before it even is in its current form and size, like because now we have it's hosted in a luxury car garage. But at the time, it was there was like a local brewery, Holler Brewing, that hosted it like the first time I went. And there's where I met my co-founder Lisa, or Nifty Nay on Twitter. And she basically was like, I want to start a weekly technical meetup. And she was like, please come if you want to. And I didn't really know of her at the time, or I knew of Core Lightning. I guess back then it was Sea Lightning, so I knew what she was working on, but I never been introduced to her as a person. But I kind of was reading the room and kind of noticed the respect she got amongst everybody who was there. So whenever she invited me to the meetup, I'd already decided, like, 2 weeks ago, that I wanted to get more involved. So it was just, perfect timing. And that meetup grew from like four initial, like, so there was one guy that she just met with, like the first meetup she had before I even joined was just one of our friends now, like one of my friends now, but I didn't know him at the time. And then the meetup I went to, I invited one of my friends. It was four of us, and like the biggest meetup we've had has been maybe about 12 because we kind of keep it word of mouth. We don't really promote it, but we have like 8 core friends. We call it, and we call ourselves the Blockheads, right? So it's kind of just Base 58 has just kind of been a labor of love of just showing up, right? And kind of like you said with proof of work, Lisa had been kind of working on some course material that she wanted to start teaching, and she had the course material, but she kind of wanted somebody to come in and be on the business operations and promotion and biz dev side of things. And at the time whenever I met her, I didn't really have it, I didn't have it in my mind's eye that this is where things would end up, but it just kind of over time, we built a rapport and got to know each other better. And she came to me with the idea, and I really kind of felt that this is exactly what I wanted to be doing, is getting more, like I said, getting more involved. And I felt that after, by the time she introduced the idea, like I already knew of how prolific she was and how smart she is. So I was like ready to jump at the opportunity, and we meshed really well as a team, and we've just been able to kind of iterate and execute, and we're just going to keep on doing that, and keep on trying to improve the product offerings we give to people, because we really want to help people on their journey, right? Like they're like most everybody in Bitcoin, unless you literally just kind of found the white paper by yourself and just talk to Satoshi directly, like, or actually didn't even talk to anybody, I guess, but everybody learns from somebody is what I was alluding to. So we want to kind of help people lessen the learning curve, and kind of be able to get in and be able to contribute. And we've had a couple of our alumni already get jobs at Bitcoin companies, and their learnings at Base 58 were part of preparing them for that opportunity. So it's really awesome being able to just give it give back and kind of just pay it forward.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I agree with you 100%. Like most Bitcoiners learn from somebody else. And, at the same time, they a lot of Bitcoiners that I know are more than willing to kind of share their knowledge as well, which is great. So, on that note, there is a lot of FUD going around right now with the price action and all that kind of stuff. So, as like a Bitcoin educator, I don't know if you like to call yourself that or what, but you got Base 58. So how do you kind of tell people now, that Bitcoin's a good investment or a good, store of value or a good place to park their money? Like, how do you kind of go about that conversation right now when it seems like the world is ending all with Bitcoin?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So first off, from a pure price perspective, I would just say zoom out, right? Because on over no 4-year period has anybody holding Bitcoin been down over 4 years, right? So that's the first thing, is just zoom out a little bit and kind of just see the albeit short relative to maybe other quote unquote asset classes, Just look at history, right? And understand that Bitcoin trades 24/7. And in liquidity events, you sell what you can, not what you want. So the fact that Bitcoin is a global market that trades 24/7 makes it very attractive, to a very attractive asset to liquidate, in times of stress. So the fact that it moves so quickly can, counterintuitively be a positive thing, right? Because of the fact that it just means that there is, there's a market that it can be used and liquidated within pretty much whatever people want. But even outside of that, every 10 minutes on average, a block is being created, regardless of the price movements, right? Bitcoin, the system itself has no concept of its price, right? That's kind of, human value being ascribed to this invention. Some people call it discovery, however you want to characterize it. And like the price doesn't actually impact the system itself and how it runs. So like in terms of it being a holistic system and an alternative system, like it, obviously in terms of being able to support a global economy, like the value per Bitcoin is going to have to go up. Just or or I guess inversely, the price of everything has to come down, right? Denominated in Bitcoin. But the point being that in order for Bitcoin to be able to support a global economy, there's more scaling that has to be done. But from a price perspective, it has to absorb a lot more value and a lot more things have to be denominated in it. But this past week, Bitcoin plus plus in Austin just kind of goes to show that if you kind of are in Bitcoin and you keep up with what's going on, the prices and everything, right? Like ultimately, there are a lot of smart people that are working hard and giving their time, some for free, to improve Bitcoin because they're hopeful for the future, and Bitcoin is part of that. So while the price might move and fluctuate, wildly in the short term, over the long term, not only has the price, gone up on a long time frame, but the system has gotten more robust. And ultimately, I would argue that the deeper you get in Bitcoin, even though it still affects you and it doesn't, it doesn't feel good when the price goes down, in certain regards, you reach Bitcoin Zen whenever you're happy. The price goes down also because then you can buy more Bitcoin, assuming you have the dry powder. So it's kind of a counterintuitive feeling, where at least where I'm at Bitcoin, where even though the price goes down and we're down like almost 70% from the all-time high, it's still I'm still very hopeful for the future of Bitcoin and very excited at the prospect of being able to get, cheap Bitcoin, because I kind of just see it as being at a discount.
Yeah, exactly. And if you zoom out, like even like 2 years back, it was at what, like about $4,000, about March, May 2020. So I mean, like if you go back even just a couple years, you 5x your money. So in my opinion, that's not a bad investment. I don't know, call me crazy, but yeah, I agree with you 100%. It's a lot of people get into it for the number go up, and at the same time, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I did too. But you kind of figure out the deeper principles, and you kind of dig into what's going on in the overall like Bitcoin economy. And I agree with you 100%. A lot of smart people are working on it, and I think the very interesting thing is now, and we'll kind of get into like a little bit of some of the exchanges and stuff like that in a second, but if you look at some of the exchanges, you're seeing a lot of massive layoffs, and that's kind of the thing, that the companies that are dealing in the shitcoinery are kind of laying a lot of people off. But on the flip side, a company like Block and Cash App and all these things are hiring Lightning developers and all these other things. So and Bitcoin companies are hiring. So I think it's like really interesting that even in a down market, Bitcoin companies are hiring, while like companies that kind of dabble in the shitcoinery are, not necessarily thriving as much. And I think there's a good reason for that. So, I think overall, I'm just very bullish on the space. And I think even with the recent price drop, Bitcoiners kind of are licking their chops, like you said, looking at it as a discount. Whereas, shitcoiners and maybe like stock pickers and other things are kind of freaking out a little bit more.
Yeah, so I would say in terms of shitcoiners and stock pickers freaking out, I think that kind of just goes to show their actual conviction level, right? And because ultimately, if I didn't think Bitcoin would surpass its all time highs, I'd be freaking out too, right? Because I denominate my savings in Bitcoin, so I'm going down with the ship at this point, right? But I believe that on a long enough time frame, big more and more people will want to denominate their value in their savings and their time in Bitcoin, and for that reason, the price will just by factor of more people adopting it will go up, right? Like it's just a kind of just math, as people say, right? But if you are kind of in it for a quick buck, and it's just like kind of you're playing the greater fool Ponzi of like I can make money as long as I get in and get out. Then if you kind of get caught flat-footed and you didn't get out quick enough, and on top of the fact, you might have been in a shitcoin to 20, 50x, and now you held it back down to the bottom. Of course you would be feeling bad because you probably didn't have a lot of conviction in the first place. And if you did have conviction in it, this might have tested your conviction. And I had a similar story, right? I my history in Bitcoin isn't completely clean from shitcoinery, right? So it's one of those things that hard lessons teach really deep, give deep learning, right? And either it's kind of like either you lose or you learn. And fortunately for me, I learned, and I lost. I lost too, but I learned from it ultimately. And they say that I guess like smart people learn from their own mistakes and wise people learn from mistakes of others, right? So if there's anybody out there that's listening and you're kind of just finding Bitcoin or quote unquote crypto now, and you find this podcast, like definitely don't waste your time with crypto. It seems shiny, and there are a lot of narratives that kind of try to lead people away from Bitcoin, in my opinion, to enrich themselves, whether they admit it to themselves or not. But learn from the mistakes of others. There are a lot of people that got caught up in this Terra stuff and the Celsius stuff. There are a lot more insolvencies that will probably pop up as these next weeks and months go on. So learn from the mistakes of others and just kind of find the signal in Bitcoin. Would be my argument or my opinion, but yeah, like I think so for the conference, I had my mom come out and volunteer, and for the most part, man, like up to this point, Bitcoin has been a number on the screen for my mom. But kind of seeing all the people who are just came together and friendly and want to learn and are motivated and are working on a lot of things, kind of really evolved her perspective on what Bitcoin is and kind of the promise of it. And I think that ultimately, you have to kind of like Dave Chappelle said, Twitter isn't a real place. You have to kind of like, you have to kind of get out off of the internet to really understand the full impact of Bitcoin and the way that it's able to impact people's lives by talking to people and meeting people and kind of just having those interactions. So, it's scary right now because the price is moving against us. Well, once again, that's all a matter of perspective. Like, you need more sats, but the price is going down. But I've never been more bullish on the underlying robustness of what's being built out in Bitcoin, and that trend has never had a bear market. Like, the building trend in Bitcoin has never backtracked. Like it's always been up and to the right in terms of making the system better, having more features, more options, and trying to developers really thinking deeply about how to best implement a system with the trade-offs that they're presented with, and allow people to have choice in the software they run and kind of like, how they choose to use Bitcoin, because ultimately Bitcoin is backwards compatible all the way to the first version released by Satoshi Nakamoto. So that there is a lot of work that goes in to be able to make that possible, and it's just a beautiful thing whenever you actually understand the mechanics, even though it takes a little while for that to happen.
Exactly. No, I agree with you 100%. And I love that little monologue you went on there. Just preaching to the choir, man. I mean, I agree with you. Like these crypto schemes, it just seems like, they're kind of disingenuous as it seems. And, it sucks for seeing, it sucks that you're seeing like a lot of people getting rug pulled, and, but I think it's going to create more Bitcoin maxis, and that kind of brings me to the first story. We'll jump in right away because you kind of mentioned it as already. But exchanges are kind of stopping withdrawals. So I've seen it on Celsius, not the drink, not the temperature, but the exchange. Coinbase, BlockFi, and others have either paused withdrawals or limited the amount of like crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, that you can withdraw from the platform. So I think Bitcoiners have been kind of screaming this since the Mt. Gox situation. Yeah, why don't you get into, I guess, like keeping Bitcoin on an exchange? Like, what's your view overall on that, and view overall on like the situation, pausing withdrawals and pausing withdrawals or limiting them?
Yeah, so there's a learning curve to Bitcoin, right? And I understand that, Bitcoiners understand that. So I can understand why people would want somebody, somebody that they trust, whether that trust is like really well placed or not, to kind of hold their hand or do things for them, right? But ultimately, Bitcoin is the first form of money, asset, whatever, however you want to characterize it, that you can remove all counterparty risk from, right? And that is no liability of anybody else, right? It's other than gold, which is a bare asset that in and of itself holds value. There's nothing else like Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin is an improvement on gold because it's not physical. So like gold's limitation is the fact that it was physical, and that's why gold became centralized, because ultimately, in order to use it in commerce, there's a huge friction to the fact it's physical, and it's hard to subdivide it, without having a specialized knowledge base of how to melt down metals and recast it. So the fact that people put Bitcoin on exchanges and kind of use them as their confidence crutches makes sense, from a initial entry into Bitcoin perspective. But like, I would urge people to try to get over that learning curve and educate themselves as quickly as possible, because ultimately you're replicating the system that Bitcoin is obsoleting by introducing a trusted third party, right? And ultimately, some people say not your keys, not your coins. Other people say not your keys, not your cheese. However you want to say it. What that means is that ownership of Bitcoin is all knowledge based. Like, Bitcoin is just ultimately a text system that is open and distributed, and essentially ownership to the units that are tracked within the Bitcoin ledger are secured via what are called private keys, and private keys are just like imaginably large numbers, right? But essentially, knowledge of the private key, a lot of times they are encoded in what are called seed phrases, which is just a more human readable way to represent this really large number. So instead of being a number with up to 50 or more digits, you can put it in a 12 to 24 word phrase, and that's how you can represent it. Like the same as a word in English can be represented in Spanish or Chinese. It's still ultimately has largely the same meaning, but how you represent it is different. But like learning all these things is not easy, and like Bitcoin, I would argue, is counterintuitive until it's hyperintuitive, right? So it makes sense that people want to have somebody to trust, but the problem is you can't trust people. Like if monetary history has told us anything else, it's that don't trust people with your money. Like ultimately, the allure or the draw of being able to take people is just too strong for a lot of people. And we don't know if Coinbase, is going to have problems making good on all of the people that they owe, or BlockFi, but it seems Celsius is already at that point. Like, they haven't come out and been forthright about it, which is part of the issue of why you don't want to keep your Bitcoin on these exchanges. But it seems from outside looking in that they're already at that point where probably all of the people that use their lend product and are actually unsecured creditors, and even people that use their wallet or bought Bitcoin or whatever through them, they're probably not all going to be whole. Like, so ultimately, Bitcoin gives you the ability to control your wealth in a way that nobody can take from you. Like, I don't advocate for this, but you can die. You can die, and nobody can take your Bitcoin. Like ultimately, with anything that's physical, if somebody kills you and their physical item is near in the same vicinity or in proximity that you are, they can take that from you. But with Bitcoin, the way that it's engineered is, like I said, Bitcoin ownership is knowledge in Bitcoin. So if you die with the knowledge of your Bitcoin, nobody can take that from you. And that's kind of something that's like, they say that nobody can take an idea from you, right? Like, or nobody can take knowledge from you. And that applies to Bitcoin. So if you kind of give up that superpower of knowledge being ownership whenever you trust somebody else to safeguard that knowledge. So that's ultimately why Bitcoiners, beat the table about getting your keys off of exchanges, because you are ceding your power to the exchange, and now you're at the mercy of their good or bad intentions, or or incompetency, or anything in between, right? Like I kind of have a thing I always say in terms of people in power, like whether their actions are malicious or incompetent. But a lot of times it doesn't really matter because it still affects you the same way. But you don't really want to be asking yourself whether the intentions of the people you thought you trusted are malicious or incompetent. You want to just know that the work you put in is the foundation of how you secure your wealth, and are able to create a legacy off of that, and pass it down to other members of your family, as whenever you pass on.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And I think when it comes back to, you're putting your assets on an exchange that's essentially unregulated. Like you said, you're trusting a third-party asset or a third-party company to hold your assets that you could potentially hold for yourself. So you're saying that you trust these other people opposed to trusting yourself. Maybe some people don't want that liability, but you got to understand that risk, and that these companies too, they don't really have a long track record, right? So like a Coinbase and some of these other ones, I think Coinbase was the kind of the first mover, or at least one of the bigger first movers. And I think it's maybe like 8 years old or 5, maybe even less than that. And so these companies, kind of are just getting started and just getting into their phase. And so they haven't really faced a big economic downturn like we're kind of coming to right now. And so you're trusting a third-party company with really not a proven track record in an environment that, is kind of uncertain for not only that company, but for everybody. And it's in an industry that's, not really regulated. And I'm not really pushing for regulation or anything like that. But if it's a company like Charles Schwab or one of these brokerages, they have to go through everything through the SEC, and it's a lot more regulated. Whereas these Bitcoin and crypto companies, they're still getting, under definition of regulation. The SEC is kind of figuring out like whether or not, how to track it. And so like nobody's really keeping track of these companies to see if, if you buy an asset on that platform, if that company actually buys that asset or if they reinvest your money and just kind of say that it's there, like it's not really being tracked. So, I really do feel for these people that have their, Bitcoin and other crypto assets to a lesser extent on these exchanges. But I think it's going to teach everybody kind of a lesson, right? That one, that exchanges aren't really a safe place for your assets. Unless maybe you're doing trading or something along those lines. But even that, I don't really recommend. But and two, like, if you want to take ownership, Bitcoin allows you to do that, and you can do that. And like you said, if you want to pass it down, you have more than enough opportunity to do that. And so I think Bitcoin makes it really powerful where it's not gold where you have to get it verified or, you need to lock it in a safe or something like that. You could simply have like a, USB, or you could get another company like a Casa or one of these other ones to kind of do multi-sig. There's like so many other ways to make it secure where, where like gold and like stocks and everything like that, like you might not necessarily be able to regulate on your own. Right. So maybe these, like a Schwab account or some of these other ones limit the amount of money that you take in and take out. Whereas like Bitcoin, you could do everything instantly. And that's, simply the beauty of it. And that's why, I think you and I are such huge advocates for it. So I think it's a tough lesson to see a lot of these people learn, but I think it's a warranted one. And that, at the end of the day, is going to make people stronger Bitcoiners.
Yeah. So to that, I would say that, there's a reason why our brains, interpret pain, right? Like, or like pain is a biological evolutionary reaction to stimuli in our environment, right? Because it's basically supposed to teach you a lesson, right? Like, if you experience pain, then that kind of makes you think like, take a step back and like, what caused me to experience pain so I can prevent this again, right? And our brains are wired for risk aversion. So, ultimately, this is a shitty lesson. And I like, trust me, I've been there learning shitty lessons before, and it's not fun. But it, like, the way that you can elevate from shitty lessons is by actually learning from them, right? So anybody that has learned a shitty lesson, it's I don't know your personal situation, but you can get out of the situation you're in, right? Like and you can start back from a foundation of is trying to do better and trying to improve and just have that aim and try to do that every day and kind of just go from there. But to your point, there are a lot of mechanisms within Bitcoin that allow you to secure it, right? Like, we don't have to get into all of them now, but multi-sig is one of those. And there are providers like Casa, like Unchained, that are companies that, even though they have a short track record, they, they actually kind of take away some of the trust by using on-chain mechanisms. Because ultimately, Bitcoin, regardless of government regulation or extrajudicial regulation of some of these multinational regulatory bodies that really aren't of any one country, but still somehow determine a lot of the regulations that come down on different global citizens. Like, Bitcoin ultimately doesn't care about them, and Bitcoin is only regulated by the rules that were set out in Bitcoin, and the rules that are ultimately enforced by full node runners. And what I mean by full node runners are like people who have the full archival history of every transaction happening in Bitcoin, and also choose which version of Bitcoin they run. Because each version of Bitcoin, even though it's backwards compatible, each newer version adds new features, and some fix some bugs. And so ultimately, as the end user, with Bitcoin, you are empowered, and you're empowered by running a full node and enforcing the rule set that you choose. And when that scales up, it's pretty much like economic majority. You kind of economic majority matters in order to be in consensus. But that's also the beautiful thing about Bitcoin too, is technically, if you don't agree with the economic majority for one reason or another, you could be in the minority and still enforce your own rules. And like that would cause a chain split. And ultimately, we, in terms of just causing less confusion amongst people who are new to Bitcoin, we generally I guess developers and interested parties try to avoid chain splits as much as possible. But ultimately, it is always an option that anybody can use, right? Like ultimately, if tomorrow the principles of of what we consider as Bitcoin, like essentially the chain that goes all the way back to Satoshi. If I don't agree with those principles anymore, I can take the history up to that point and kind of fork it off and start a new chain, right? And ultimately, that's happened before, and that has led to just a lot of broken promises and maybe broken dreams, because the economic majority hasn't moved over to those chains. But the point being, the fact that you can always means you have an option, and just because you have an option doesn't mean you should exercise it. But optionality is always better than less options, right? Like more choice. Like I kind of always argue that money generally and Bitcoin specifically gives you more choices, but it doesn't help you make good choices, right? So you can still make bad choices, but you have more choices, and ultimately, with more choices, you can always put yourself in a better position than with less choices. I would argue, at least. But yeah. So Bitcoin is not is regulated in and of itself. So ultimately, even trusting regulators to get your Bitcoin back is not a foolproof thing. And Bitcoin, there's trade-offs all the way down, right? Like, so the trade-off of putting your money on exchange is that they can run away with all of it. So ultimately, the fear of losing all of your Bitcoin is not abated or mitigated by putting it on exchange either, because you might lose your Bitcoin through incompetence if you move it before you actually understand mechanically how to do that. But you can also lose all your Bitcoin maliciously by the exchange that's taking it from you. So ultimately, education is always going to be the your biggest tool when it comes to using Bitcoin, right? Like education is the bedrock of self-sovereignty, and ultimately, in order not to rely on people, you have to build up the knowledge and the ability to rely on yourself. And when it comes to owning Bitcoin, that is the pinnacle of Bitcoin, is the fact that you can own it, and you can reliably know that nobody can confiscate it from you if you secure it correctly, and it can't be inflated if because nobody can force you to run a newer version of Bitcoin that has inflation introduced to it, right? And those are things, those are principles or advantages that are enshrined with usage of Bitcoin, right? Both in terms of using a full node to like I said, to have the full history and enforce the rule set you want, but also to secure your private keys and make sure that knowledge or that information and that knowledge is safeguarded, and that you're not giving that to somebody else to do with how they see fit.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a point that you raised there about Bitcoin not being inflationary. And so that'll bring me perfectly into the next story of the Fed raising interest rate by 75 basis points. So I feel like this was kind of more of more of the one in anticipated Fed meetings. Maybe it's just because I started paying attention. I don't know, but it was the largest rate hike in 28 years. Essentially, the Fed's raising interest rates in an attempt to fight inflation. For those that don't know, the interest rate essentially is just like the easy accessibility to money. So if a bank or somebody or a business wants to get money, the interest rate kind of affects how easily they can get that money and how much of that they have to pay back. And so, what do you think about, I guess, the Fed trying to fight inflation by raising the interest rate? Do you kind of subscribe to the theory that, although it was, the Bitcoin has like these hard money principles and that cap, I'm kind of still of the theory that it's not only that the monetary policy that underwent, during 2020, printing 40% of the money supply, but also like the supply chain issues that we're still kind of going under. So do you think that the Fed's making the right move here by raising these interest rates, or what is your I guess overall opinion of this move by Jerome Powell and our friends at the Fed?
Yeah. So I don't think they're making the right move. For me, the right move would be to get out the way, right? But they wouldn't do that. But I kind of see this as shock therapy, whereas essentially the Fed is between a rock and a hard place, right? Because ultimately, I saw a meme that I kind of feel like this is really it. But like at this point, they painted themselves into a corner, and the two options they have are inflation, high inflation, and a recession or depression, right? And I think they're trying to teeter totter and stay on the fence while there's hurricane force winds that are blowing them either direction, and they're trying to fight it, and I don't think they can. But when it comes to interest rates are affect the price of money, and it's probably a weird concept for a lot of people that haven't kind of done a deeper dive into what money is. But in, I guess, the Austrian economic school, money is the most saleable good, which just means it's like the most desired good in the market, essentially, right? But money is still a good, and like every good, money has a price, and the price of money in Bitcoin is ultimately electricity, right? Like Bitcoin is imbued with value, through thermodynamics, and that's diametrically opposed to the central bank model, in which there are a group of people that determine the price of money. So the Fed is raising the price of money to destroy demand, and this is largely from their own words, right? Because as an entity, the Fed has the ability to create money out of nothing and to change the price of money. What they can't do is create goods out of nothing, out of thin air, right? So ultimately, with inflation, what that tells you is that there's more money chasing goods than there was relative to the more recent past, right? At the basis of what's happening. So basically, there's if yesterday there was $100 chasing 100 apples, and today there's $200 chasing 100 apples. Well, ultimately, all else equal, the price of apples has to come up for the on average for those same apples to end up to the people who want them the most, right? Or at least who can afford them. And so ultimately, the Fed can't affect the supply chain at all, really, like, because you can print more money, but ultimately there's a concept of moral hazard, where once you print the money, who do you choose to give it to, right? And kind of once you choose to give it to somebody, you're picking winners and losers, and you might not be picking a winner that actually is going to use the money to the best of the the most efficient use of it. Like you might give it, it might end up in the hands of a tech company that is trading at 50 times earnings and, has never actually turned a profit, right? So ultimately, I don't think that they're doing the right move, but I don't envy the job because they're pretty much like they can't admit fault. Well, they can, but they won't. But they also can't fix what's happened, right? It's kind of just like it's almost like they've sliced their finger off and they're just trying to like glue it back on, right? Like and they're just not admitting to themselves or anybody else that they're missing a finger now. And like there's some people that see the finger's missing, and kind of be calling it out and understand that you're not going to be able to put it back on. But the facade is too many people are caught up in the facade at this point for in my estimation for them to turn around now. And it's just like they're too deep. Like the white lie has snowballed way too deep now, where it's like they're caught in their own web of lies, and now it's just like they're trying, like in my estimation, they're trying to get as close to causing a recession without causing depression, maybe even as possible. But it's like it's probably too late. And like you said, you print 40% of the money supply over like $5-6 trillion within 12 months. What do you expect, right? Like in 2008, it took billions of dollars to bail out the system, and now it's up to trillions. And it's just like I'm not the one who came up with this analogy, but it's an apt analogy that it's kind of just like trying to keep a junkie alive, by giving them more drugs, right? Because otherwise their body was shut down because of the dependency on the drugs, but the drugs are causing the dependency and killing them at the same time. So it's just kind of like, it's one of those situations where you can go through you can have the relapse and have the shock of the relapse, or you can just keep on feeding the drugs until it kills you, right? And taking the drugs until it kills you. So it's I don't I'm not much of like a pontificator in terms of like what the Fed will do or like how things will play out, because I think there are way too many people that sound very sure of themselves in terms of like what the Fed will do and this and that, and to a certain extent, like they might have inside information, right? So I'm not going to say that what they're saying, doesn't have some basis in truth, but I don't really pontificate on the decisions they make because I don't know, but I do think that they're just like right now trying to hand wave, and it's just not working, and that's just like diametrically opposed to the way Bitcoin works, right? Bitcoin, the monetary policy in Bitcoin was set out at the Genesis block. When Satoshi developed Bitcoin, whether them being a person or a group or whatever in between, they decided that there would never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, which are subdivided into 100 million subunits called that have since been named Satoshis. And so ultimately, there will never be more than 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis in the system, right? And the issuance of these Satoshis happens on a roughly 4-year cadence. Technically, it is every 210,000 blocks, which averages out, on a 10-minute block schedule to about 4 years. But every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin created cuts in half, and it started at the outset with 50. And right now, we're in what's called an epoch, which is just the time frame in between these what they call halvings, where the supply issuance cuts in half. We're in the epoch where 6.25 Bitcoin are created every block, and roughly, I think May 2024. I need to go back and look, but I think give or take around there. The next halving will happen. Will be in a new epoch where 3.12 Bitcoin will be created every block. So it's just diametrically opposed to the system that we have right now, where fallible humans with the hubris to think that they can actually determine the way that a global economy moves, and that they have more information than the global economy, make arbitrary decisions that ultimately affect everybody in the economy, and it has an outsized impact. Bitcoin is diametrically opposed to that. And we all ascribe to the monetary policy that was set out in the beginning. So Bitcoin is an opt-in system that myself and you and everybody else that is in Bitcoin, whether they know it or not. And if you don't know it, then definitely get on learning it. I would, like I said, for me, what really helped was Parker Lewis's Gradually and Suddenly series. But regardless, we all are ascribing to the monetary policy that was set out in the beginning of the system, right? And ultimately, each of us that runs a full node enforces that monetary policy by running that full node. So, that is why we as Bitcoiners, think that Bitcoin is such a revolutionary system, because it empowers the individual. And despite the price movements, which the more you need Bitcoin in countries that experience hyperinflation or high inflation, it affects you more, and it's unfortunate. Like, regardless, it's that power that is the real benefit of Bitcoin. So it's a long-winded way of saying that who the fuck knows what's going to happen with the Fed and their choices, but best believe it's going to have a negative impact on you. And because they're at a point where they really can't really steer the ship in a different direction.
Exactly. And I think, like you said, the Fed's kind of in a tough situation where the damage is already done. And Powell was actually asked if people losing jobs is necessary to lower inflation, and he said, "We're not looking to have a higher unemployment rate, but I would say I'd certainly look at that as a successful outcome." So just kind of pointing out, like, the generic economics that our monetary policy and all of the systems that we have in place is kind of lining out. It's obviously not the most optimal system if we need some sort of unemployment rate. But yeah, we're running. We got 4 more stories to get through. So I want to be cautious with your time. So I'm going to jump to the next story real quick, because I think this is going to be a very interesting one for you, because you're also a Bitcoin educator. But Jay-Z is partnering with Jack Dorsey for the Brooklyn Bitcoin Academy. So I don't know if you saw this story, but essentially Jay-Z and Jack are debuting the Bitcoin Academy in Jay-Z's hometown. The goal of this academy is to provide people tools to build independence for themselves and the community around them. And this will provide some residents of the Marcy House, which I believe is where Jay-Z grew up, with the innovative financial educational programs. And it's also bringing Bitcoin to people that I believe that really need it, right? Because I think, at the end of the day, Bitcoin's great for the average American or the upper class, but inflation affects the lower to lower middle class drastically more than the people that don't necessarily live paycheck to paycheck, right? Because goods and services go up, but generally with inflation, asset prices go up as well. And so, yeah, I guess, how does it feel to be kind of in the same class as a Bitcoin educator as Jay-Z? And what do you think of him partnering with Jack to, I guess, bring Bitcoin back home to Brooklyn and to the Marcy houses?
Yeah, man. So I often tell people, or talk about the concept of like 6 degrees separation, because like Bitcoin is a connector, right? And kind of Bitcoin cuts across all cultures and economic statuses, whatever category you want to put yourself in or you're placed into, right? It cuts across that. So Nifty actually does when she worked at Square for a time, and she actually did meet Jack. So there's actually like a 2 degrees of separation, I guess, between myself and Jay-Z, just through her. But I'm not very big on kind of like, I feel like a pretty bad trend on Bitcoin Twitter is like to kind of really jump too fast to people doing things that on the surface seem good for Bitcoin, and you kind of like you let a little time go by, and you kind of see that maybe some people don't have as pure intentions or like as focused maybe of a directive. And I'm not saying that I think this is the case with Jack and Jay-Z. I don't know them at all personally, and really have no opinion to give on them as people. But I think assuming, like, I'm going to assume the best intentions of them, and assuming the best intentions, I think is great, right? Like being a Black American, I think that there have been a lot of promises that we have been given and we have fallen for. And I think ultimately that's kind of like the problem with politics, is there's so much doublespeak. Like, to what you were saying about Jay Powell, basically saying we don't want to say that we're trying to target more people to lose their jobs, but ultimately we need people to lose their jobs, is what he was saying. And he was saying that you have to read between the lines to know that. And the more Bitcoin education that can kind of cut through all the doublespeak and kind of just get to the core of like, this is a technology that could benefit you, and this is how it could benefit you, and we want to help you, we want to empower you, and to understand that and use it is the more education, the better, right? And I really hope that the initiative is just focused on Bitcoin, right? I really hope that it doesn't become like a crypto thing or anything like that. And I really hope that Jack and Jay-Z have the best intentions. And like I said, I'm going to assume that they do, because I don't know them personally to give a determination otherwise. But I also am not going to just jump on the bandwagon of like rah, like you're awesome for doing this. Like, kind of, and I would hope the people with Basic DA give us the same, hold us to the same standard of, don't fall for the fact that we're saying what we're saying. Just give time to create proof of work so that you can evaluate like what actually is the impact that this initiative is having. So, I think of Bitcoin as my own 40 acres, right? Like, like ultimately, the story of basically the free slaves getting 40 acres and a mule, regardless of its genesis, is something that is part of American history, right? And that's something that I don't really necessarily believe in reparations, because I think at this point we're just kind of so far removed from kind of the people who had direct hands in owning other humans, that it kind of gets murky, right? But if I had a magic wand and I were able to make decisions, the closest thing I would say to reparations is to give Black people the ability to own Bitcoin and not have and use it as legal tender, right? That would be the closest I would ever say to have reparations, right? But ultimately, I think that to your point, people that are most affected by the negative externalities of the current system are the ones that need Bitcoin the most. And I'm glad that they're targeting that group, because ultimately, basically, 58 right now, like, we are trying to be a sustainable business, right? So our course offering right now we've gotten feedback for some people, has been prohibitively expensive to take, and we're trying to create our course and trying to create an asynchronous course where we can bring down the price point. But ultimately, for us, we don't have the money to do things like this, right? So it's awesome that there are billionaires that seemingly want to give back. So I think that's great, and the more people to do, the better. And maybe one day, our paths will cross. Like, assuming that we both of our organizations continue to act in the best outcome for Bitcoin. So it'd be awesome if one day, like I said, we can collaborate in one way or another. So like, if that happens, I have to come back on your podcast and then talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. You got to tell JH to the Izzo or something like that. Start spitting one of his old verses or something like that. Just jamming out with him. I think that would be awesome. But yeah, I mean, I think Jack is a very good advocate for the space, and everything that he's doing with Block is great. But that also brings me to my next story, where I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. So Jack Dorsey announced that he is building Web 5 with a company called TBD. So the ETH crowd has been very, very, very big on the development of Web 3. And now Jack Dorsey is two-upping them, not one, but two-upping, going from Web 3 to Web 5. But essentially, it's being developed with the idea to combine the content ownership of Web3 with the decentralized content creation of the traditional web, aka Web 2. So that's how they got to Web 5, using Web 3, Web 2, whatever. But I don't know, man. I don't really think that this is development of this is like super necessary. I'm curious to hear your opinion on it, because I feel like this is kind of like similar to every Bitcoiner having like their own Bitcoin node or Bitcoin miner. I think like for mass adoption, maybe the true Bitcoiners will have a node and a miner, but will the average person have a Bitcoin miner or a Bitcoin node? I don't really think so. And I don't really think that it's necessary for the network to work. But so like on the same breath, would somebody, necessarily have their own server instead of trusting like an AWS or, one of these other server providers in order to kind of run everything, or have this cloud, or just to kind of protect their own data? I don't know. I mean, like the American people and like people globally have kind of been giving up their data for so long that I don't really think that I think that there's like maybe a select group of people that would do that, but will it be widespread and massively adopted? I don't really think so. I'm curious to what you think about it. And yeah, I think, do you think like it's kind of like, necessary, like Jack needs to be doing something like this, and I'm way off base, or do you kind of agree with what I'm saying?
I to be honest, I haven't really given it a lot of research. Like I think the name is kind of cringy, to be honest. Like I kind of feel like it's trying to like take back something that in the first place was kind of cringy, and but I don't, it's I don't really know exactly the I know you kind of gave me the biggest understanding of what they're setting out to do, because like I said, I didn't really do much research into it. I've kind of just seen things anecdotally about it on Twitter, but I think that kind of like the a personal computing or personal server movement, I do think is interesting, right? Like what was happening with Start9, and to a certain extent with Umbro too, I think is interesting. And I think the more choices, the better. And ultimately, over time, the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that over time, the market will suss out all of the bad actors, right? Because there's no bailouts, and I don't know that what they're building is useful, because I don't really know what they're setting out to build. But like, if it is useful, to be used, and if it's not, like, so what? Like, it's his money. He can, I kind of am, like, use your money how you see fit, as long as you're not impeding on the freedom and of others. So, I don't have a strong opinion on it, so I'm not really gonna speak on it too much. But I don't think Bitcoin needs it. Like, Bitcoin will be fine without it, but that doesn't mean that it won't be a net positive. Like, but it also could be a net negative. Like, I think it's just kind of another one of those things, kind of like with the last thing we talked about, is I'm just going to give it time, and let them prove themselves. And if they prove themselves, then that's the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that I don't have to do anything. And there are people in the world that improve upon Bitcoin. All I have to do is just hold my Bitcoin, right? And the people who are improving on it, and they don't, like, I don't have to be a stakeholder in what they're doing, and they can still benefit me personally. So this whole Web 5 stuff is probably going to be like one of those situations where it's just like, until like I've gotten, I've heard of, I've gotten more familiar with it. Um, I'm just not even gonna worry about it. It just is what it is. Like, I'm not really very big on, like, on, billionaire or like tech tech icon worship, right? Like, so, you know, like I said, presumably Jack, you know, he definitely on Twitter, he cuts to the chase in terms of seemingly being forthright in about how he feels about Bitcoin. So, like, from a public perspective, what I see of Jack, I don't have a lot of bad things to say. But once again, I don't know him personally. And the thing with social media generally is that you cultivate the public persona you want, right? Like, so, you know, like, my profile picture is nothing like me, right? Like, it you know, it's really a Black Twitter meme that kind of, you know, I kind of just poured it over to you know, kind of a Bitcoin context. So, you know, from the outside looking in, you know, I don't really have much of an opinion, but I am hopeful and optimistic that you know, this will be something that benefits all holders of Bitcoin in the long run. And if it's not, you know, I still have Bitcoin, so it is what it is.
I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I get you 100%. Like, I think there's a lot of people that kind of worship every move that billionaires make, and I agree. Like, this is a story where I'm just like, I like Jack and I like what he does for Bitcoin, but is this necessary? I don't really think so. So, I also agree that everybody should kind of have their own opinion on everything, and that you shouldn't really just follow somebody blindly. Like, if you disagree with Mike Saylor on something, like, you know, that might be an unpopular opinion in the Bitcoin space, but I think it's necessary to have those discussions. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree more on that point, where it's just like, it is like something where you shouldn't really worship these billionaires and these big people getting into Bitcoin, because, you know, I think what makes a network work is everybody kind of having their own opinion. But let's move on to the next story. So, the Central African Republic, they announced that they're going to make Bitcoin legal tender, and they've kind of brought out their path to Bitcoin adoption. So, they released a report, but it did include some limitations. Some of the limitations were the lack of energy and internet in many of the country's businesses. Also, that a purchase of a SIM card for a smartphone requires a government issued ID, and a lot of the country does not have a government issue ID. But it also focused on 8 recommendations in order to further adoption. And those 8 recommendations were to focus on Bitcoin to facilitate adoption, buy and sell Bitcoin, so kind of get your feet wet in it, integrate the Lightning Network, start Bitcoin mining as a country, start education around Bitcoin, and use the Sango wallet, figure out taxation, and issue government-backed bonds with Bitcoin, or Bitcoin-backed government bonds. And it sounds awfully similar to the El Salvador plan to me, and what they're doing right now. So I wonder if Bukele was kind of in, you know, the Central African Republic's ear here, and kind of like swaying them to do this. And I know that, you know, notable Bitcoiners like Samson Mao and Alex Gladstein have also been kind of helping line out this plan. So I wonder if it's kind of like they're trying to make more of a universal plan to do this. But what do you think of CAR, you know, making Bitcoin legal tender, and more countries kind of bringing it on this way?
I think ultimately, you know, it's in my mind's eye, when I play out everything, I think that every government over time will have to bend the knee, right? So the sooner you do it for the government, the better, right? I am skeptical of politicians, you know, regardless of the level, whether, you know, I guess in the U.S. state, federal, or local, but I don't really know how that breaks down in the CAR, but I think that that, you know, a lot of the problems that well, not a lot of problems, but at least one of the problems in what you talked about in terms of the needing the government ID for the SIM card, like, that's a policy issue, right? If the politicians there are actually serious about making Bitcoin, you know, a tool in the daily life of their citizens, then they can change that policy, right? So I think that you know, I'm cautiously optimistic, you know, that all these different governments are you know, planting a Bitcoin flag, but at the same time, like, much to the same of like, not falling for Bitcoin billionaire worship. I definitely don't think you should fall for politician worship, right? Like, and to a certain extent, I kind of see a little bit of a cult of personality thing developing with Bukele, right? Like, and not to say that he doesn't have the interests of his people at heart, like he might, but there definitely seems to be a lot of kind of like personal aggrandizement mixed in with that, right? And the CR announcement is been like under 2 months now or something like that. So there hasn't been enough time to really, for me to really have a true determination of like how I feel about it. But I think that it's good for Bitcoin that governments are just basically capitulating, right? Like, and I'd rather a government be forthright and ultimately try to roll out the red carpet for Bitcoin. But I also am not completely trusting of the fact that this isn't a Trojan horse, like, and that this is not just like a attempt to garner support or kind of enrich the people who are making the decisions, like, and it's really kind of just like a lot of the frictions around using Bitcoin are policy issues, even in the U.S. Like, it's not really like, obviously in terms of scaling, there are different solutions that are being built out and experimented with, from side chains to the new Chaumian eCash implementation, Fedimint or Minimint, and the idea of space chains, and obviously the Lightning Network. So they're different scaling solutions that are being proposed and built out. That whenever the time does come where we have that tipping point, and the majority of people in the world are using Bitcoin versus not, like, I think that this will just be like a drop in the bucket moment, right? Where it's like, this was inevitable that governments were going to have some official opinion or stance or policy agenda when it comes to Bitcoin. But I don't trust political agendas ultimately.
I agree with you 100%. And I've kind of heard rumblings too. I had Paco, who's doing, he's basically like going through various countries and using only Bitcoin to kind of live. I had him on the podcast, and he said he knows somebody kind of inside CAR's government, and they're trying to develop a CBDC. And so they're kind of using this Bitcoin as like big publicity. And at the end of the day, they're still going to do the CBDC or something along those lines. So I agree with you. I agree with you. I never really trust the politician's agenda, and they always want to kind of stay in power. And this is the one move that really takes that away from a lot of the politicians and central bankers. So, I mean, from their perspective, I could see why they wouldn't want to do it. But like, do I agree with it? No, of course not. So, I'm not sure if this move is genuine or not. Like, for the people of CAR, I hope it is, because from my understanding, like, it's a pretty impoverished country, and similar to El Salvador, I'm sure it can benefit greatly from adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender. But that'll also bring me to my last story here. And it's more about companies, where I think companies are kind of hurting right now. I think companies are kind of hurting now. So I think like this would be big for various businesses across the United States and globally. But there was a recent survey published by Deloitte and PayPal that 70% or 75% of merchants are planning to accept Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency payments within the next 2 years. So I think this is kind of a wild number of 75%. But is it unexpected? I'm not really so sure. In my opinion, I think like this is something where it's going to be done more so out of necessity, because more and more people are going to be demanding to use Bitcoin. And, the Lightning Network kind of undercuts those middlemen of MasterCard and Visa. and takes away their 3% fees. So, instead of raising the prices by $1 or so, like they can kind of minimize that by just simply using Bitcoin. So what do you think of like more merchants and businesses kind of taking on Bitcoin and accepting Bitcoin as payment?
I think it's just one of those things that Bitcoin is an idea whose time has come, and ultimately, you know, merchants accepting Bitcoin is a rational determination for them, right? It is like ultimately, if people were trying to do it for publicity, it would have been done with like all the pushback in 2013, 14, whatever, because before he went the way of Bitcoin Cash, like Roger Ver presumably was a good advocate for Bitcoin, right? And he's been pushing for merchant adoption, like basically his whole time, and that largely led him to go down the Bitcoin Cash route, which I think was a futile attempt at trying to push his own agenda in Bitcoin, which he never he has yet to eat enough humble pie, to kind of come to the realization that people are going to do what they want with Bitcoin, and that's the beauty of Bitcoin. Is like that you can't tell people what to do. So like if I in a past life worked for one of the big four consulting/accounting firms. So I kind of take what this report with a grain of salt too, like at least that number, right? But it's just rational at a certain point. Like obviously Bitcoin is the U.S. dollar price is volatile, right? Like that, nobody that is being intellectually honest would lie to you about that, right? But in terms, and once again, like the monetary properties that you are able to benefit from by adopting a Bitcoin standard and the price appreciation over time that you are subject to benefit from, is undeniable, right? Like, ultimately, Bitcoin has a short history relative to other things, but in its history, let's just look at its history, right? In its history, has there ever has anybody ever been able to single-handedly make a change to the network? No. Has has the encryption that secures Bitcoin ever been broken? No. Has anybody lost money on over a 4-year time frame? Lost money, quote unquote, in dollar terms, being invested in Bitcoin? No. Like these are all things that as a merchant, and two with the Lightning Network, if like you can not only cut down on fees by becoming a member of the Lightning Network, but you can also kind of create different interesting schemes, like in terms of how you connect with your customers, right? Like you can essentially kind of have direct connection with your customers that you encode certain promotions into, possibly, right? And I don't know if that's technically feasible today. Probably is, like, but if not, there are people that are smart enough to figure out ways to kind of embed promotions, probably on a network protocol layer, right? In terms of like sats back and things like this, and it's just like Bitcoin is like money is ultimately an idea, and up to this point that idea has always had a physical instantiation up until Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has freed the idea from its physical shackles, and it's been able to do that by merging the idea of money and the idea of the internet. And the internet essentially, I would characterize it at its basis, unshackled communication from its physical instantiation of either needing to physically be around somebody to talk with them or communicate with them, whether through sign language or any other physical means of communication, or obviously written communication, right? Like the internet made it so you can communicate with people digitally, and without there needing to be a physical proximity, a physical link. Whether that's like I said, a book that is passed down from Shakespeare to modern day, or like you and I being in a room talking to each other, right? Like we're able to do this over the internet. I'm not even sure where you are in the world. You're not sure where I am in the world, but we're able to communicate. And ultimately, like it just makes sense for people to adopt Bitcoin once they understand it, because you can send money at the speed of light, right? The only physical limitation in terms of sending Bitcoin is the actual physical connections, right? And fiber optic cables move at the speed of light, so you can send money at the speed of light that on the Lightning Network has instant settlement or near instant settlement, and has a reliable monetary policy and is securable, into the foreseeable future, right? And once you understand this, it just makes sense. Like especially whenever you compare it to the current system, right? Like I've said this before, I'll say it again because I really like this quote. But in the autobiography of Malcolm X, he talks about a conversation he had with his former mentor, Elijah Muhammad. And basically, Elijah Muhammad was telling Malcolm X that you don't have to point out a dirty glass. All you have to do is put a clean glass next to it, right? And it's a very subtle thing of like, you don't have to tell people that, you don't have to actually go around and tell people how bad the current system is, right? They'll eventually figure it out for themselves. All you have to do is just show them Bitcoin, and that's the clean glass. And whenever they actually pay attention enough, they'll see the differences. Like if they look at the two glasses closely enough, you'll see you'll see a dirty one because of the clean one next to it. And I just think that I'm skeptical of the number, just because I wouldn't put a number on anything like that. But it's believable to me though. Like it's I don't believe it because they said it. I believe it because I believe it can happen.
I agree with you 100%. And we're running a little long, so I want to be cautious with your time. So let's wrap things up with one last question. Bullish or bearish going forward in the short term, and bullish or bearish, I guess, overall in the space, and why?
So like I said, I'm not a pontificator, so I'm not gonna price wise. Like I am, like you don't want to. I'm a permanent optimist when it comes to price, so you don't want to ask me.
Yeah, I always ask people that, but it's a dumb question. I think I don't know why I keep asking. I more so because I think people kind of take it like a different direction. Like whenever I ask it, nobody really takes it like more so, I guess, the price direction. They always take it as far as the space goes. So
that's gonna be my follow up though, in terms of like. So I'm not gonna comment on the price because I have enough humility to know that anything I say can and will be used against me. No, but just joking. But definitely, like I said, I had a front row seat helping to plan and promote and execute Bitcoin Plus Plus. We had about 150 attendees in all. We actually ended up having, we didn't expect either one of them, but for part of the conference, we had Adam Back, who is the CEO and co-founder of Blockstream, and whose paper, Hashcash, which kind of sets out the concept of proof of work, was referenced in the Satoshi white paper. And Taj Draya, one of the co-authors of the Lightning Network white paper, were both in attendance for a portion of the conference. So and then outside of them, there were a lot of other awesome builders, educators, and just people that are just largely involved in what's going on that came. And just having a front row seat, it's just like there's no way not to be bullish on like the problem solving ability of Bitcoin as a whole, right? And there's just like with Bitcoin, because of the fact Bitcoin is money, and money, the most saleable form of money, which Bitcoin is fighting to be, is always going to be one half of every transaction in the economy, right? So ultimately, like being bearish on Bitcoin, in my estimation, is like being bearish on humanity, right? Because I think Bitcoin is like a transformational technology for humanity. Like there was fire, then there was agriculture, then there was electricity, like the steam engine, and like then telecommunications leading to the internet, right? I would say those are like probably some of the most impactful human inventions that were purely created through human ingenuity that I can think of off the top of my head. And Bitcoin is just an amalgamation of some of those, and money. Money's another one. I don't know how I miss money. Bitcoin is an amalgamation of some of these concepts, and I just think that it's going to lead to more human flourishing, and it's going to drive out a lot of the undue and unjust power that some people have over the lives of the majority of the world's population, right? And to specifically talk about the people, I mean politicians and central bankers, and there's no way to be bullish because like there's so many people in Bitcoin that don't do it for power. Like there's sure there are people who like the clout that they get from what they do, right? And ultimately, do you, right? Like I like I said, I don't really fall for the whole clout chasing paradigm, but as long as you're not like using your clout to get over on people, clout chase all you want, in my opinion, right? But there are a lot of people who don't want clout and who actually want anonymity and are like working on Bitcoin just purely because they feel compelled to. And I don't think that you can extinguish the light that is Bitcoin, without just a huge disruption and kind of how like the things we expect in daily life, right? Like like short of there being like just shutting down the whole internet and telecom networks. Like I don't really see this Bitcoin train being slowed down, and that is very hopeful for me because Bitcoin is a movement that empowers individuals by disintermediating people who like third parties that put themselves at the center of certain transactions or policy decisions, and that is very hopeful for me.
Stack, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I mean, we had a very long rip, so I hope I didn't take too much of your time, but I really appreciate it. It's a blast. We're going to have to connect again soon and hopefully meet in person, maybe at one of these Bitcoin meetups or Bitcoin conferences. But why don't you tell the audience what you got going on, where to find you, and all that jazz?
Okay, yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Stakamoto, STAKMOTO 21. If you're interested in what I'm doing at Base 58, you can find us at Base 58 BTC on Twitter, on YouTube, and on BitcoinTV.com. And then if you're interested in Bitcoin Plus, you can find us on Twitter at BTC spelled out. And then a lot of the talks, I'm still working on getting them up, but all the talks and the hackathon projects will be uploaded to the Base 58 YouTube and Bitcoin TV accounts. So I've been working on it pretty much nonstop since yesterday, and I'm going to get them out by this weekend. So that'll be up there. So, that's where you can find me. And then if you want to follow my co-founder, basically Nifty Nay, NIFTYNEI on Twitter. She's doing a lot of great work, and she has a very interesting Twitter timeline. Like, I don't really post a lot. I'm more of like a retweeter of content, but she kind of just uses Twitter as almost sometimes at times her own inside joke machine. So it's kind of funny following her. But yeah, man, I really appreciate your time, and don't feel bad about holding me. This is a lot of fun. Like, this is my third podcast appearance period, so thank you for that. And lastly, I'd like to shout out BTC Connector on Twitter. He actually is the one that connected us. He hosts he co-hosts the Huntsville, Alabama Bitcoin meetup. So if you're ever in Huntsville, pull up. You can find them on Twitter at BTC Connector. So thanks, man, and we'd have to do this again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Shout out Justin and the Huntsville, Alabama Bitcoin meetup. Yeah. I mean, Justin's been great. He's been on this podcast as well. So if you guys have been out there, he's a great connector and just always like moving pawns and stuff like that in the Bitcoin space. It's great. So he's introducing me to a lot of people and I really enjoy him as well. So on that note, check out Stack, check out Nifty, and check out Base 58, Bitcoin Plus, all that kind of stuff. That they're putting out a ton of great education and really putting out the proof of work in the Bitcoin space. So go ahead and support your fellow Bitcoiners. And Stack, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, man. You're standing on the shoulders of giants. The shoulders of giants. Okay. See you, man.